Welcome to Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. My name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining me here for the latest episode of Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to like and comment on the video if you're watching this on my YouTube channel. And if you're listening to the podcast, make sure you give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And you can find it wherever you get your podcast for free. So excited for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Joining me here as my guest today on the show, you can find him on Twitter at Mike A. Scotto, senior NBA insider for USA Today's Hoops Hype. Joining me here on the show today, Michael Scotto joining me here on Inside the Mavs. Michael, what's going on?
Hey, what's up, Kevin? Happy to see you doing well with the new show, man. Mavs have given you a lot of good stuff to talk about pre and post. So happy to see you doing well, brother.
I appreciate it, man. Good to see you as well. There's a lot to get into, of course, with this Mavericks team, because as we record this team 48-30, 18 games above 500, and it's been fun to watch this team gel, especially since the All-Star break with the acquisitions of Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington. Before we get there, I want to ask you, what's kind of the national perception of this team, given the success that they've had post All-Star break and what they've been able to achieve and what that looks like potentially for their playoff prospects?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, Kevin, you've got to look at the duo of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving as a formidable duo, and one that, it does scare teams going into the playoffs, because those are guys that are proven playoff performers that have hit big shots and can carry a team on their back. Kyrie has always thrived as, I think, arguably the most elite Robin that there's been. He did it with LeBron. He's doing it now with Luka, and he's always been an efficient scorer, which I think gets underrated for him a little bit. But I mean, Luka's certainly in the MVP conversation. We'll definitely touch on that. If I had to forecast that for you, but I think with the team overall, ever since the Grant Williams move, I feel like where he's been gone, and you get PJ and whatnot. I think the only thing about that caught me, and I'm sure we'll touch on it more, was giving up a top 2 pick. But they're clearly in a win now mode, and it's helped them, and so has Gafford. I think having Gafford and Lively as a 2-headed center monster has been perfect for them. They can both thrive as rollers with Luka and Kyrie in the pick and roll, and defensively, you know what you're going to get there. PJ can occasionally stretch the floor. So they've gotten a little bit more balance with their team. So going into the playoffs, I would say from a national perspective, certainly the duo of Luka and Kyrie scares teams. Are they a finals contender? I'm not sure about that just yet. I think they can certainly frighten teams, and the West is so loaded. You've had about 11 teams over 500. So I really think it's matchup dependent upon who they face in the playoffs and how far they can go. But certainly they've got, I would say, a puncher's chance anytime you've got Luka and Kyrie. And obviously for Kyrie, the big asterisk for him has always been his health. So hopefully he can stay healthy for Dallas and continue to play as well as he has.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you bring up that point, because we're looking at a streak right now where Kyrie Irving's played 29 consecutive games, the most that he's played consecutively since he was with Cleveland back in the 2016 season. And the Mavericks during that time, they're 22-7 in those games with Kyrie, playing. So it speaks to the idea that when Kyrie is available and playing at the high level that he is, getting close to that 50, 40, 90 mark on the year, this team has been, ultimately successful. And you started to mention a little bit, because this team right now, if the season were to end today, they would be the 5 seed taking on the Los Angeles Clippers once again in the NBA playoffs. And it's funny, Michael, and I'm sure you can understand the reference. When somebody asked me about it the other day, I was like, you know what? Maybe Luka for the Clippers is his version of Detroit's, the Detroit Pistons for Michael Jordan, when Michael had to get through Detroit to eventually get to a championship. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen this year, but it feels like at some point Luka's just got to go through the Clippers to eventually get to where he wants to go in terms of winning an NBA championship, it feels like.
Yeah, look, I think for Luka, it is the next step. But, they came close previously, and I think now, what's interesting with the Clippers now is you know what Kawhi can do in the playoffs when he's healthy,
Mm-hmm.
certainly. But this is a very pivotal playoff run, I think, for James Harden and Paul George for their legacies looking forward. You know, James Harden's obviously trying to win a championship, would like to ideally stay with the Los Angeles Clippers long term. Paul George is a guy that's also going to be, unless he signs an extension, he will be one of the most sought after free agents in this market. That could be unrestricted and a guy that maybe teams think they can get. Certainly the Philadelphia 76ers are going to be in that mix, among others as well. So there's a lot riding on this for the Clippers, and I'm curious how Harden and Paul George handle that pressure. But I mean, if I think it'd be a fun series if that ends up being the case, and a pretty even one at that. So I'd be excited for it, certainly, no doubt about it. And I think in some ways, with the way that the Clippers have kind of been sputtering a little bit, you can make a case it's a coin flip at this point because Dallas has played better, and they're kind of getting hot at the right time. So it would be a fun series for sure, and I would look forward to that immensely.
Yeah, Mavericks fans would relish the opportunity to finally eliminate the Clippers because even in their Western Conference final run, it was the Utah Jazz and the Phoenix Suns before they ultimately lost, of course, to the Golden State Warriors in that Western Conference finals in 2022. So it's going to be a huge, huge run for this team at the end of the regular season, but hopefully for them as they get ready, into the postseason. Before we go any further, Michael, let's take a quick break here on Inside the Mavs. On the other side of the break, we're going to talk about the impacts of PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford and what they've been able to do to help this team as far as after the trade deadline and the way that the Mavericks are playing. But before we get there, let's hear from today's sponsor of our video and our podcast. Let's hear from Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs. Again, thank you for hanging out with us through that spot there and hear from today's sponsor of our video and our podcast in Aura, here with Michael Scotto, senior NBA insider for Hoops Hype for USA Today, here on the Inside the Mavs podcast. And before we went to break, talking about obviously, the final 4 games of this regular season as the Mavericks get ready to make hopefully a playoff run for them. But before that, this team was sputtering and not having the opportunity to really find some consistency, behind Derek Lively, who had been playing well at the center position, needing to get more athletic as far as their wing defense is concerned. And they were able to acquire PJ Washington from the Charlotte Hornets and also Daniel Gafford from the Washington Wizards. From your perspective, Michael, what has been the impact of those two, and not only the skill set that they bring, but how that's been able to work well and develop with the Mavericks so far since being acquired by them?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, I think first off I'll start with Daniel Gafford. I think when Lively's been out of the lineup, he's been a guy that has almost been a little bit of a mirror image of what he brings. Rim roller, shot blocker, runs the floor well, and being a good defender certainly on this team is a bonus for Gafford. I think the depth that he's brought has been needed. and it balances out the lineup well. With PJ Washington, PJ can stretch the floor. He can do a little bit of everything, play the 4/5 for them. But, it was interesting when I was looking at Dallas ahead of the trade deadline. I did think giving up a top 2 protected pick down the line when Luka Doncic is not under contract for PJ Washington was a bold move, I would say, to say the least, by Dallas. And to me, that signaled an immediate win now mentality when I think in talking with many rival executives, at least around the league, they thought maybe Dallas would wait until the summer and try to get another star and package some future first round picks that they had instead of going for, role players like PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. So that was one note that I took from those transactions. And it was interesting, Kevin, because like Washington was in serious talks with Dallas about a Kyle Kuzma trade, and that ultimately fell through. And I'm not sure if Gafford was a part of those talks and whether it would have been a bigger package or not. But at the end of the day, obviously they came to terms on Gafford. But I wonder if like those initial talks, more so about Kyle Kuzma, led to maybe a pivot towards Daniel Gafford and a meeting of the minds there. So uh, overall, again, they balance out the roster. They do help them win now. I just think the price they gave up for PJ was, with that top 2 protected pick, that was a lot, I felt personally. But it again showed to me a little bit of an urgency to make this team more competitive and be in a win now mode. To Dallas's credit, it has helped. I think the ultimate proof in the pudding, of course, is going to be what happens in the playoffs. And I'm curious, internally what their expectations are for this team. Because I'm not sure they're a finals contender. I think they have a puncher's chance, depending on who they face, to advance in the playoffs. But the West is so loaded at this point. They were 2 interesting moves. Of the 2, I liked Gafford. I like his contract. And PJ's goes down, I believe, as well. It's a descending contract. But I think that Gafford really has thrived with Luka Doncic.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch him on both ends of the floor. Top 10 shot blocker in the league, a guy that's leading the NBA in field goal percentage. At one point, made 33 straight field goals and was part of the national conversation in terms of the amount of field goals that he had made. Gafford's been really good. And for Washington, I mean, he had his best game recently against the Golden State Warriors. Had 32 points. Had the game winning layup, of course, to win that game. And his flexibility, I feel like, has been really good for them because you're right, he can guard multiple positions, but I think part of what Nico Harrison and his team has wanted for him to focus on is obviously the defense that he brings and how much more impact he can have there. And I think as that continues to evolve, hopefully he becomes, another guy that can provide an element of scoring, especially from the three-point line, given some of the things that we've been able to see from him in the past as a shooter, but not nearly as consistent, I'm sure, as he would like to be, but it's starting to show a little bit more of that form here as the lead, especially from the three-point line for this team.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. So, look, Washington Gafford for Mavericks fans, they've become fan favorites so far for the Mavericks based off of what they've been able to do so far for this team. And speaking of fan favorites, because Kyrie Irving has come in and has played extremely well. We touched on it a little bit earlier, the 29 consecutive games that he's played, flirting with 50, 40, 90 and what he's been able to do as you mentioned a little bit earlier, in elite Robin, way that he's done in his career now, obviously with Luka Doncic. You have a unique perspective because you were there during the Brooklyn years when Kyrie Irving was there. And I'm curious to hear, for you now, having watched him in Dallas now for what has been now a year, what that transformation has looked like based on what he's doing and how that he's been able to grow it looks like with his team here versus maybe what was taking place in Brooklyn during that time.
I mean, Kyrie Irving certainly looks as spry as ever. He's having the most dunks in his career. I'm not saying he's a high flyer, but that's been fun to see. I think regarding Kyrie's time in Brooklyn, there's a lot of layers to it. So I'll try to make it succinct. But he was one of the top reasons that the Brooklyn Nets got Kevin Durant to come. But he also wasn't able to stay on the floor as much as he'd like, including when they were making their playoff run and he landed on Giannis Antetokounmpo's foot in the playoffs, and that was the year that everybody thought they really had a shot to go to the finals, but it didn't come to fruition. Harden hurt his hamstring, and Kevin Durant's foot was a little bit too big and stepped on the line against the Bucks, which could have changed a lot of things, including Mike Budenholzer's job and other things. Who knows
Yeah,
what
the 30
Carlisle.
for 30 on that
Yeah,
Kevin Durant's foot on the line is going
but
to be epic down the road.
yeah, and I mean, Kyrie, he didn't get the vaccine, and that held him back from playing during the COVID time frame. And it was a part of the reason that James Harden got frustrated there. And then after that, Harden departs via trade. They get Simmons. It doesn't really play for them. But then they go 18-2 with KD and Kyrie and Jacque Vaughn. And at that point, he was like, all right, I want to get my money. And they didn't want to give him the money because they felt that there wasn't going to be a team out there that would give him a huge payday. Dallas comes around, is looking for a number 2 to put with Luka Doncic, replace Jalen Brunson, who they had lost in free agency to the Knicks, and it became a fit there. How can I say this? I think what's interesting about Kyrie's legacy a little bit in Brooklyn is going to be determined by 2025. So what do I mean by that? Well, by then the Nets are going to have the ability then to have max cap space, and because Ben Simmons comes off the books, and they can generate max cap space. They can have more draft picks to trade for a star, and if they don't get another star by then, I think people, Kevin, are going to look back at Irving and realize a little bit more his impact on bringing Durant maybe was greater than advertised, and how vital it was for the Nets to get star talent for the first time since, really the Jason Kidd, Vince Carter era. And part of that was because Kyrie Irving grew up a Nets fan and he wanted to play for the Nets. And that was part of his personal story. So that's a unique circumstance. Not all stars have that. Sometimes stars are looking at just a blank situation and that's it. But that added to it. So when he was on the court, it was a joy to watch. I mean, him and Kevin Durant are two of the most talented players I've seen. And it was a joy. It was just an infrequent amount of time. And I think if you ask both of them, they fell short of their own expectations. In Dallas, I think he's afforded more of an opportunity to probably be himself a little bit. And with Dallas, I would say that, it's still like kind of in the honeymoon phase with the brand new contract and everything. And he's played well. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the years to come. Whether he says anything, if he watches any other documentaries or stuff that could be controversial. But I mean, on the court, I said it to you earlier, he's probably the best Robin they could have for Luka's Batman. And I think he's certainly been embraced by the organization. He's got a lot of former Nets executives there, off the top of my head, Matt Riccardi, Andrew Baker, other guys there. Obviously, Jason Kidd there, who we grew up idolizing. There are the people there to help him achieve the greatness that he wants and to put him in a comfortable environment. So I think you're seeing that a little bit too with Kyrie.
And a lot of folks, and I'm interested in your perspective on this, feel like that Luka-Kyrie duo is arguably the best in the league. Obviously, you've got the Jamal Murrays and the Nikola Jokic's and other duos that you can name as far as some of the best duos in the league. How are you surprised at how well these two have been able to mesh their games together? It took a little while for them to really kind of learn how to play off of one another. But are you surprised at how well this duo has been able to perform now playing together?
I mean, look, it's not like a pick and roll tandem, right? But I think what makes Kyrie and Luka a great fit is Kyrie is a really good catch and shoot 3-point shooter. He can play off the ball, even though he's obviously dominant with the ball as a creator offensively, but they can take turns alternating. But what makes Kyrie, I think, an ideal fit again is his catch and shoot ability off the ball. And Luka's going to find guys. This is a guy that can average 10 assists a game, and they've thrived well together. I think great. You'd rather have the talent. Once you have great talent, you start there, and then you worry about the fit. But there was no reason why they couldn't become a good fit. It was just a question of whether they'd be on the court enough together. And this season, as you touched on, he's played the most amount of consecutive games he has since Cleveland, and that's allowed them to develop that chemistry needed for the duo to become a better fit.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch these two. And of course, Kyrie with the epic buzzer beater that he had against the Denver Nuggets a little bit earlier on this year was just fun to watch. And these two have been magic together on the court. And speaking of magic, one of the nicknames that Luka has around here is Luka Magic, of course. And he has had, Michael, a spectacular year, really a historic season when you start to look at some of the numbers that he's put together. And I'm sure for you and for me and a lot of folks, Nikola Jokic right now seems to be the leader in the clubhouse for his third MVP. I'm interested from you, though, where is Luka in that MVP discussion for you and the season that he's put together? And in some ways, and a lot of ways, honestly, the best season that he's had in his NBA career at this point.
I mean, at worst, Luka's got to be top 3 in that conversation with Nikola Jokic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. In my personal opinion, that's at worst. Luka's averaging about 34, 9, and 10. And I wonder if he'd be more talked about for MVP if he averaged a full triple-double, kind of like when Russell Westbrook did when he won MVP. And by comparison, I mean, Luka Doncic's scoring output thwarts a little bit what Russell did by a few points at the time when he was with OKC. So to me, they've won more now to put him in that conversation. It wouldn't shock me if he ultimately ends up being 1, 2, or 3. With Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the Thunder have taken such a leap, and he's obviously the best player there. Mark Dagnall is going to be in the mix for Coach of the Year, so I could see him getting votes as the MVP because of all of that context. Jokic, I mean, it really don't need to be said. I think some people wondered if, truthfully, he should have been the MVP last year. Sometimes there is voter, I don't want to say remorse, but, they try to almost like make up for the guy, had a great finals run. And, sometimes I feel like even though it's not supposed to, that weighs in the back of the mind with voters at times. I just think Luka's had such an incredible season statistically. And, he's pretty on par with Jokic. I mean, Jokic has played a few more games, but not enough that it should be that much of a disparity. I'm very curious to see, obviously if Denver ends up with the 1 seed, they'll have that narrative, best player on the best team and so forth. But I mean, I really think Luka Doncic's MVP candidacy is a little bit underrated at this point. I understand also that like Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to get some votes. Jason Tatum's going to get votes because he's the best player on the best team in the East in the Boston Celtics.
Sure.
It wouldn't shock me even if Anthony Edwards gets a couple of votes, but I really think Luka Doncic's MVP candidacy this year is going a little bit underrated, and it would not shock me if he finishes as high as 2. I'm curious if by the end of the year he has this like insane, I don't know, 60-something point game to maybe try to win the award.
On top of the 73 he's already had against Atlanta earlier this year.
Yeah, exactly. Like what more does he have to kind of do individually? So that's kind of my stance there on Luka. Simply remarkable season, and clearly the best trick shot maker in the NBA, throwing the ball off the scoreboard, bouncing it off the floor and in. I don't know if you remember the old Dude Perfect like YouTube videos where they would do these trick shots. They should get Luka Doncic for sure.
Yeah, he would be a perfect fit for Do Perfect and what they do because the trick shots that they make are simply incredible, and Luka has put himself right in that category with them, and he's had, as you mentioned, a phenomenal year, 34, 9, and 10 just about, and a guy that's got this team winning in the kind of rate that keeps him in that discussion. Last few minutes before we get you out of here today, obviously, with the season coming to a close and what we've seen so far in the regular season, as we expand our view to the entirety of the league with the last week of the season being this week, what are some of the things for you that as you get toward the end of the regular season that you have kept your eye on that you start to look forward to as we move toward the end of the regular season and into the playoffs now?
Sure. I think what's going on with Milwaukee. Um, they have not fared as well as they thought they would after making the change from Adrian Griffin to Doc Rivers as coach. Chris Middleton has not returned to his all-star form previously and has dealt with some injuries. I still think Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo are trying to find a little bit more chemistry, though Dame has clearly been the closer for them, which they brought him there to do. Um, I want to see how far Cleveland can go in the playoffs. It's going to affect Donovan Mitchell's future, I believe. Um, I think in the West as well with Minnesota, eventually the luxury tax payments are going to hit them pretty hard. And, now with the ownership issues there and between Glenn Taylor, A-Rod, and Mark Laurie, does that change the team's appetite for having such a high luxury tax bill? We don't know yet. We'll have to see. But, I don't think they'd want to have an early exit given the success that they've had. So that's something to look at. Certainly the Phoenix Suns, they built a team that they thought would be a win now team and contend for a championship. They've had a little bit of an up and down season, I think. And, they've been lucky that Kevin Durant, quite frankly, has been this healthy, knock on wood, for most of the season, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Ultimately, I see it right now, the Nuggets facing the Celtics for the title and, be a 7-game series. And you can check back with me a little later who I think is going to win, but I think it's a little bit of a toss up now personally. So those are some things I'm looking at, Kevin, looking ahead as we get ready for the playoffs.
Yeah, a lot of great storylines in this league. It's been a fantastic year for the league overall. It feels like the health of the league is getting to a really good spot as they get ready, of course, trying to find a new television deal and what that's going to look like. The NBA, the health of the league
Yeah.
looks really good right now. Michael, tell the folks where they can find you, what you got going on, man, what we can look forward to as we get toward the end of the regular season and into the playoffs.
Sure thing. You can follow me on Twitter at Mike A. Scotto. Mike A is in Anthony, Scotto, Scotto. Obviously, my work is on hoopshype.com. You can check out the Hoops Hype podcast as well. I'll be doing a lot more episodes now, coming up with teams going into the lottery and what's next for them. So stay tuned for that. Recently did an interview with Isaiah Hartenstein. We talked about him and his upcoming free agency and Tom Thibodeau behind the scenes, Nikola Jokic, and what he learned from him. It was a fun interview. Definitely check that out. And coming up, I'm going to have a story on Malik Monk's free agency future as well. Both those guys regarding Monk and Hartenstein are going to be some key free agents coming up here this summer. Certainly worthwhile for a lot of teams. And for Malik Monk, we talked about his future, six-man of the year candidacy. He's going to be one of those guys in the mix with Naz Reid and Bobby Portis. So you can check that out as well coming up soon. Should be coming out on Wednesday, so stay tuned.
Busy man this time of year, and I appreciate you stopping down for a few minutes with me, Michael, here on the Inside the Mavs podcast as this Mavericks team continues to make a march toward hopefully a deep playoff run. So I appreciate you hanging out with me today here on Inside the Mavs.
My pleasure, Kevin. Keep up the great work and enjoy the playoff run ahead for Dallas.
Appreciate it. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, thank you to senior NBA insider for Hoops Hype for USA Today, Michael Scotto, for joining me here on today's episode. Make sure you like and comment on the video here on YouTube. And if you're listening to the podcast, give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And remember, Inside the Mavs is the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. My name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. I'll talk to you next time here on Inside the Mavs. Talk to you later. Peace.